25 października podczas Igrzysk Wolności odbyła się scena podcastowa Powered by Orange and Polityka Insight. Przez cały dzień nasi goście i gościnie rozmawiali o współczesnych wyzwaniach. Dyskutowaliśmy o nauce, polityce, sporcie, kulturze, gospodarce i społeczeństwie. Zapraszam do obejrzenia rozmów nagranych podczas sceny podcastowej. W 5. odcinku Alastair Campbell, dziennikarz, były rzecznik Tony'ego Blaira i współtwórca podcastu The Rest is Politics, i Andrzej Bobiński z Polityki Insight zastanawiają się, czy Zachód przetrwa nieliberalną rewolucję.
Dzień dobry. I'm going to switch to English very fast.
Thank God for that.
And I'm afraid we don't have, well, this is not going to be translated, so please bear with us. I have to say I'm very excited that we could do this, so thank you very much for accepting this invitation. From my perspective, you're the biggest star of this conference. It's not George Clooney. I don't know how many people agree with me, but probably there are horns in this room. Alastair, you're a person who doesn't need lots of introduction, but I just jotted down some things because maybe this can lead us to questions that will come from the audience. You started as a journalist in the Daily Mirror in the 80s. Then you're Tony Blair's press secretary and the spin doctor of the 90s. That was the moment I learned about the term spin doctor. You are a podcaster and a videocaster with The Rest is Politics, quite obviously. You wrote 18 books. You are a
21.
21. Well, I think they need to update your Wikipedia. You're a triathlete, still only running, biking and swimming, no other. And allegedly, you were the inspiration for Malcolm Tucker in the acclaimed TV series The Thick of It. And I guess that must be true, because you're not saying it's not.
I'm very proud.
You are? Okay.
Very proud of it.
Listen, my idea for this conversation is that I'd like to talk about the bigger picture, and I have a huge question to ask you, and maybe we can go into that for some 20-25 minutes, and then we'll open up and take some questions from the audience, and then you can ask about anything you'd like to ask Alastair Campbell. Anything ranging from football and Burnley to Gaza, I guess, and anything else you'd like to ask. What I wanted to ask you is, and this is the big question, will the West survive the illiberal revolution? And basically the smaller question to that is, what's left of the West? Do we still have a West to talk about?
Wow. Yeah, I think we do, but it's changing, and it's changing very, very fast. And I think it's very unpredictable as to where it's going to end. What do most people mean by the West? Geographically, I think they mean United States, NATO, Europe, and they also, I think, mean a set of values. And even though those values have always endured periods of strain, I think right now they're enduring a strain that, is potentially leads to it being broken. And I'll try not to get too kind of worked up about what Donald Trump is doing in the United States, but every single day, I would argue, he is doing and saying, but more importantly, doing things that are putting the things that we've taken for granted under massive pressure. The alliances. I mean, we're in this really strange place where you get the sense, and this maybe relates more to what he says than what he does, but often what he says is a precursor to what he then does. You have a sense sometimes that his traditional allies being treated like enemies and his traditional enemies being treated like allies. And that is deeply confusing for the world. If you're Canadian right now and you're sitting there, Canada's one of those countries, it's like kind of, the Scandies, it's like everybody likes Canada. And it's sitting there atop the United States. And yesterday, literally on the back of somebody who is not Mark Carney, putting out a true clip of a speech by Ronald Reagan about tariffs, he's pulled the plug on the trade talks that they're having. Last weekend, virtually no coverage around the world of this because it's become so normalized. The International Maritime Organization is concluding a 10-year negotiation for a new regime on shipping fuels, and overnight Donald Trump pulls the plug. after 10 years. And so I would argue in all these ways, large and small, he is undermining things in a way that ultimately, and undermining the rule of law. We, on the podcast last week, we had an interview with a woman by the name, she's an amazing woman, she's 80, called Brenda Hale, who was the first female president of the Supreme Court in the UK. And she said, as a lawyer, she watches what's happening in the United States right now with terror. So that is undermining things. And then the other thing, of course, we have to come to to Europe. I think Trump is probably the most talked about, covered by the media person in the history of life, because there's now so much media space. But then, so he dominates so much of our debate. But then come to Europe, and you've got this populist virus going through Europe as well. It's not impossible that before too long we'll have Le Pen, Bardella in France. We might have the AfD, certainly in the Länder, some of the Länder. We have another election in the Netherlands this month where Wilders is likely to win again, and there's likely to be more chaos. And even in the UK, I don't think Nigel Farage will win, but it's not impossible. So this virus is kind of... So, and then throw into the mix, when you talk about the West traditionally defined against the Soviet Union as was, what draws a lot of these people together is a kind of curious admiration for Vladimir Putin that is deeply strange and quite alarming. So I'd say we're in uncharted and quite dangerous territory.
How did we get here? How did this all start? I mean, where is this populist virus coming from? Because I understand that pretty much today, it's the fight is between the old order and the populists.
Well, I think partly because the old order, the architects of the old order, have not found a new order. And you've always got to be finding ways of addressing the future. But I think it goes back to the global financial crisis. I think that is a big driver of the populism. I think it's a sense that this cataclysmic event happened. The people who caused it, by and large, got away with it. And the people who didn't cause it paid a heavy price and are continuing to do so. So if you then have a generation growing up, the first generation in history, unable to say with confidence, we are going to be better off than our parents, that then opens the door to this politics of grievance. You find people to blame for your problems. They just coincidentally happen to be the political opponents of the person that's casting the blame. And we now have this thing that I call the 3 Ps: populism, polarization, and post-truth. And they are driving, and they've got, there's an appeal to all of them. Populism is a form of politics that says, I hear what your problem is, and I can solve it for you. But actually then in the polarization, what they do is they don't try and solve it, they exploit it. So populism is the exploitation of your problem, and it's the pandering to your grievance. Polarization is the driving people into tribes and keeping them there. I'll give you a very, very powerful recent example of that. Charlie Kirk, right-wing influencer, supporter of Donald Trump, he gets assassinated. Horrible event. Everybody comes out and says it's a horrible event, including Joe Biden, including Obama, including Kamala Harris. Every decent person in the world says, whatever his politics, this is outrageous. Trump comes straight out and says, this is on the Democrats. And then creates a narrative. And then when the narrative gets challenged, doubles down. So I think that's where it's come from. And post-truth is the most interesting part of this. So politicians have always, they've always been liars in politics. They've always been liars in the media. They've always been liars in public life. But post-truth is something completely different. Post-truth is the shaping of a new factual, non-factual basis. We saw it the thing I mentioned with Mark Carney. Donald Trump is out saying Ronald Reagan never said that. He did. There's the film. It's AI, says Trump. No, it's not. Didn't exist when he was saying it. That's him. So that's post-truth. Post-truth is Vladimir Putin saying it's not an invasion. It's a special military operation because Zelensky's a Nazi. So unless those narratives are being challenged, I think we're in a dangerous place. And the problem is, with these populists, you've got a generation of politicians coming up who don't see their job as challenging that. They see their job as exploiting that. And that's what they're doing very, very successfully.
So how could the old order, the Liberals, take back control? I mean, is there a way of coming back from where we're at today, or is the only thing that could happen is for the other side, for the side of the Liberals, to start playing the same game?
That's a really interesting question, and I'd like to think the answer is no, you don't play the same game. But I think there are things you have to learn from the way the other side are playing the game right now. So we had on the podcast recently Jeremy Hunt, who used to be the Foreign Secretary and the Chancellor in the last Conservative government. And he said something really interesting, which when he said it, I thought, this is nuts. Why are you saying that? But then I thought about it and I thought he's right. He said, look, Keir Starmer, whose ratings are absolutely sort of, really low right now. And Jeremy Hunt said he needs to learn a few lessons from Donald Trump. I said, what do you mean by that? We don't want our Prime Minister to lie and to bully and intimidate and all that stuff. No, I don't mean that. But I mean absolute clarity. And I also mean that you have to be in the public space all the time. That is what Trump is genius at. He's an absolute, I hate it, but he's a total genius at it. He's in the public space all the time, 24 hours a day. And he does it not by, you see, the old order, it plays the game. Tell the truth. Be respectful to the media. Donald Trump doesn't do that. He doesn't tell the truth. He's completely unrespectful, disrespectful of the media, sufficiently now to have created his own. We've just done a series on Rupert Murdoch, and it was me and Michael Wolff, the American commentator, talking about Rupert Murdoch, 5-part series. And Michael makes the point that without Fox News, there is probably no Trump. Trump worked that out. Trump worked out, I have to become more powerful within Fox News than Rupert Murdoch, who owns it. And he did. Rupert Murdoch didn't call the shots at Fox News. Donald Trump did. And look at the way he did it. He phones up. He'll phone a presenter in the middle of his show on his mobile phone from the back of a car, and they put him on live. No pictures, nothing. And then, the rest of the media follow that agenda. Breaking news. Trump tells Fox News, bang. He's making the agenda all the time. He makes the weather all the time. Now, so you need to be able to do that. And you need to be able to do it from a perspective of, I think we've got to stop thinking about how do we regain the old liberal order. You've got to find something new and better. And that requires real intellectual thinking, which I worry isn't happening on the left at the moment. The Democrats in America, they've had no real... What debate has gone in the Democrats since the election? Basically, we lost because a lot of people believed a pack of lies. Well, you've got to go deeper than that.
You, on the podcast, you had a person who looked a lot like Ruud van Nistelrooy, but actually he was called Ezra Klein. And... He likes to talk about the economy of attention. I mean, and I think this is exactly what you're talking about, attention. It's about basically making the news about you, whatever happens. And my question is, do you see anybody who understands how to play the game today? The example he gives is Zoran Mandani, the possible future mayor of New York City. But looking at, European politics, maybe even American politics, do you see anybody on the liberal side who understands and is able to play that game?
Mamdani is not a bad example. There's actually a guy who's just become leader of the Green Party in the UK called Zach Polanski, who is definitely trying to play that game. He did a very interesting election broadcast recently. He had a great slogan, "Make hope normal again." And if you think about where's that coming from, everybody knows "Make America Great Again," and it's become a kind of, because that's the power of Trump's communication. It's like now I've got a friend who supports Manchester United. I don't judge him for it, but yeah, that's what. So he's walked around all his life wearing a red baseball cap. He says, I can't wear it anymore because somebody might think I'm a Trump supporter. So what Zach has done, make hope normal again. He's and he did this election broadcast where he didn't criticize another politician. He just talked about, and of course it's easy if you're the Green Party, you're not going to be the government, you're just a campaigner. But it's that sort of politics. And so at one point, I have to say, I thought Emmanuel Macron might have been the guy. And here's the problem with democracy as it's developed. I helped Macron and I worked on his first campaign. And I thought he was one of the most exceptional politicians I've ever seen close up. And I've seen quite a few. And he was, but look where he is now. Now, is that because it's impossible to play the game when you're doing difficult things? Or do you have to go as far as Trump does? And when you're doing the difficult things, if they go wrong, basically say you never did them. I think it's impossible for a progressive politician to do that. So I think we've got to look to, this is why I'm so keen on getting as many young people into politics as possible. And I do find Mamdani, I don't agree with everything he puts forward, but I find him a very exciting proposition because he's doing politics in a different way. And do you know what's interesting about you and I talking like this? I think podcasts are a big part of this as well. Because what's happened is that the media framing of politics is being rejected. And for the life of me, I cannot see why the mainstream broadcasters cannot see this and why the newspapers cannot see this. I think one of the reasons that our newspapers are kind of dying slowly, it's not just the technology, it's the fact that they have adapted to change by being even more negative about everything than they used to be. Now, okay, that may mean that they get greater churn of politicians and they see, but it doesn't help them ultimately because people just turn away from it. And likewise with politics has become, yes, get the 3-word slogan, okay? You said take back control. That was the Brexit slogan. Make America great again. But then beneath that, again, look at how Trump does it. It's this non-stop, relentless, national, and in his case, international conversation. And is owning the space. And he doesn't just make the news, he makes the weather. And for me, strategically driven political communication has always been about making the weather. Have other people responding. You know if it's going to rain and whether you need an umbrella. And then the other guy has to work out, oh shit, I forgot to take my umbrella, right? You've got to be ahead of them all the time. And do I see anybody like that? I'll tell you a few people I see in Europe that I certainly, whether they've got this to that extent, I don't know. I think the guy in Greece is very interesting, actually. I know he's a conservative, Mitsotakis, but I think he's a really smart guy. And I think he's doing a little bit of this in a different sort of way. And okay, Greece is not the United States, but it's been interesting to watch him do that. I've got to say, I think your Prime Minister's got some of this, but he's not a communicator. I get the feeling he doesn't like communicating.
I have to tell you, we spoke about this off stage for a moment, and I believe that he's trying to learn to do this, and it's not natural for him because he rolled in a different era, and it's also a generational thing, I think. But I think that he's beginning to understand that it's these 3 components. One is you want to make everything about you, whatever you say and whatever way you talk about it. The other thing is liberal populism, and this is also something that Ezra Klein is talking more and more and writing more and more about. And the third thing is trying to take back control. I think a lot of this and where this is coming from is this feeling that we don't have control, and it's a way of communicating this to liberal voters that this is also important, and this is important for you. How do liberals take back control?
You see, I don't think it's necessarily about making it. You said it's about making it all about you. I don't think it is that. It's that you become the leader and the loudest voice of a narrative that is in people's lives all the time. And it's harder in the modern age, partly because of social media. But if I go back to our time, when I started out with Tony Blair in the mid-90s, we had this approach that was basically, can we define our strategy all the time by what we're saying and what we're doing? And can we have our strategy summarized in a word, a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, a page, a speech, and a book? Okay? That's narrative. So our word was modernization. you've just said to me, and it's an interesting thought, that you've said that what you're seeing as a political strategy for the Tusk government is to move towards liberal populism, okay? I would argue that when Macron came along at the start, I would say he was about shaking up the French state, okay? And he's tried it, and he's been pushed back in lots of different ways. Most of the European leaders in the last generation, I don't think have had that sense of clarity. You know, I'm very rarely critical of any Labour government, and particularly one that's under such pressure as ours is at the moment. But if I do have a criticism of our Labour government right now, they've got a massive majority with the vagaries of our electoral system. But if you say to most people in Britain, give me a positive word about what this government's trying to do to the country, they don't know what to say.
Why is that? What happened to Keir Starmer? Because this is something I've been asking myself from the moment they won the election. I mean, why?
Well, we talked a lot on the podcast about what became known as the Ming Vase strategy. The Ming Vase, so like he's got this huge. The Tories were terrible. We had a succession of awful prime ministers: Johnson, Truss. Brexit was a disaster. You know, Johnson just a sort of truly hideous, amoral person. Truss, ridiculous that she should be ever prime minister, let alone for whatever it was, 48 days. And the economy not doing very well. So Labour didn't have to try too hard to win. But what it meant that when you've won, when he gets into power, they've carried this Ming Vase, which basically meant that they were just being very cautious, right? You know, the slogans change, but we're a bit vague about what the change will be. We're not going to put your taxes up. We're not going to go back into the single market. Don't worry, all you Brexit people, you're safe with us, da-da-da-da-da. So what it meant is that when he got into power, first of all, they discovered the economic inheritance was bleak. They had to find money from different places. And they then, and I've always, the other point about strategy, the big moments really, really, really matter. Most people are not following politics at all. And insofar as they are, they dip in and out when something really important happens. And I saw a thing last week, for example, that it was a graph showing which moments have connected with the public under this Labour government. And they've all been negative. And the first one was taking away winter fuel allowance from pensioners. And, you know, I've been around quite a lot of election campaigns. If you're going to pick a battle, don't make your first battle with pensioners. It's never going to end well. Macron has found the same. And even though Macron is 100% right to raise the pension age, you've got to think about the politics of how and when you do it. And so I think the other thing that's happened is that Keir has, look, he's inherited a far worse landscape than we did back in the 90s. Economy a mess, geopolitical situation really challenging, social media a nightmare, depth of talent in politics not as strong as it used to be. And he's had to navigate, and I think this bit he's done really well, navigate this international stuff between Trump's more assertive America and trying to rebuild relations with Europe post-Brexit. He's done that bit really well, I think. That's been tricky. But it means that on the domestic agenda, the public is only really hearing a negative story, added to which our press and our media has become, incredibly negative and incredibly downbeat about the country. So put all of those things together, and it's tricky. And I think that the thing they've got to do is, in a sense, because they campaigned with a Ming Vase, it's almost like they're governing with a Ming Vase. Let's be a bit cautious. Let's be a bit careful. No, don't. I would, if I were him now, I would be governing like every day was the last. You've got to make change, and you've got to fight for it, and you've got to have arguments. And I'll give you an example. We've got this problem with migration. You've got problems with migration. Everybody's got problems with migration. It's one of the big, difficult issues. Every government's having to deal with it. 3 days before the Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer announced that he was going to bring in digital ID, like digital ID cards, as a not as a silver bullet, as one thing to do. Okay. And 3 days later, he's got the biggest speech in the political calendar, which is his speech to the Labour Party annual conference. Didn't even mention it. Fast forward 3 weeks, and there's a petition in the UK with 3 million names on it against digital ID cards. This is what I mean about making the weather. You've got to be ahead of the reaction to everything that you do.
Okay, I think we're going to open up to questions. I can see a number of people here who I think will have some questions. I can see a team of podcasters who follow the Premier League. So we're also going to take questions about football.
Follow the Premier League?
Very closely, very closely. I can talk about that
all day.
So I need to see a show of hands. And I see a question here, and I see a question there, and I see a question there.
So quick question on just the point that you mentioned on Trump wouldn't have won without Fox News. For me, I don't think Trump would have won without the Democrats. And what I mean by that is that the system, the US system is rotten to the core. It's corrupt from all sides. And I don't believe that someone like Trump could have grown from any other type of system. There's this rottenness. There's a corruption. People perceive it. The establishment, the Democrats, they refuse to acknowledge what is in front of them. And for me, that's the origin of Trump. To give one example, and I could pick dozens. There's a statistical anomaly, just one. There's a statistical anomaly in the investment world whereby 95%, maybe even higher, of professional money managers can't beat the S&P 500. And yet, a tiny subset of people, members of Congress, manage to reliably outperform the market because they're privy to information from, congressional committees whereby they decide the policy, they know which way the wind is going to blow because they make the wind, and then they invest, and they consistently outperform the market. And you can follow Twitter feeds, which tells...
Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi is the most famous, but they consistently outperform the market. People might not know the details of that, but they perceive just a rotten corruption on all sides. And when you have one person, even if he's a maniac, he's the only person in the room who's saying, this is rotten. What's wrong with this? He might be rotten, but he's the only one saying it's rotten. I want to burn it down. And I just can't understand the inability of the Democrats to own up to that. It's like, acknowledge this person he's rotten, but he's the only one saying this message. I want to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think the extent to which money in American politics is... I think rotten is the right word. I think you're right about that. I think a lot of policy positions in the American system, in Congress and elsewhere, are decided by who's bankrolling whom and who's got the best lobbyists making the best arguments. And that is bad politics. There's always a bit of that. I would argue that our Brexit referendum was pretty rotten on both sides, and it was intellectually corrupt. But I agree with you that I think the American system is just almost beyond repair. Now, it is the system, and the only way it's ever going to change is somebody gets their hands on power and manages to change the system. My problem with Trump is I don't believe he's blowing up the system in order to make it fairer or less corrupt. I think he's doing it to make it, and you're seeing it every single day. I mean, last week, trying to get $250 million out of the Department of Justice, taxpayers' money, as recompense for what he claims to be his costs of defending himself against the previous regime. So I think that, but I go back to the point I made earlier. I think the real issue with the Democrats is that it's not just about this money stuff. They're not having an honest discussion with themselves about why they are perceived in the way that they are, both on, and not just on that stuff, but on policy as well. And the power, there's still this enormous power within the United States of America, and this politics is influencing virtually everywhere in the world right now. But yeah, I think we're in pretty violent agreement.
I just feel it's an inability. It's a bit like that scene from Monty Python where the knight is like, it is but a scratch, and his legs are being cut off, and the system is not.
Well, listen, this. I think John Cleese and Michael Palin running America it'd be funnier than it is right now, and it'd probably be just as effective.
And just on the person addressing it, I see Pete Buttigieg as maybe one of the only people from the Democratic establishment who's actually willing to speak to the other side. I wonder what you think of.
Okay, but let's say this is your last question.
Pete Buttigieg. He actually engages.
Yeah, he's good. Listen, I think there are a lot of good Democrats, but in the end, they have systems as well as to who's going to rise to the top of the Democrat Party. Look at the way that they're desperately trying to get Cuomo to stop Mamdani. You know, it goes deeper than a few personalities, their problems, I'd say.
Yeah, hi. As Andrzej said, we were on the stage like 2 hours ago with our football podcast. I'm doing a podcast about Premier League, and I don't want to kill the mood here, but I want to ask you about what are the chances of Burnley staying up, and what do you think about Kyle Walker's cross last weekend? Thank you.
About his what?
Cross for the goal.
Oh, it was a thing of beauty. Hands up, who cares about the answer to that question? The two guys, the 3, 4, 5. Okay. So just for the context, for those who don't care and don't know, I support a football club called Burnley, probably the greatest football club in the world, because we're a town of 60,000 and we regularly have more than 20,000 in the stadiums. That's the highest proportion of any country in Europe, any club in Europe, I think. And we're somehow in the Premier League. And the cross was a thing of beauty. Kyle Walker's 35, he's still got pace and he's still got a great cross. And I think we will stay up. I think if we beat Wolves tomorrow, I'll feel very, very confident.
Okay, so now another football-related question. What do you think about the bromance of Trump that you mentioned a lot and Gianni Infantino? And do you think that the next World Cup, USA 2026, can be like one of the most scandalous World Cups? And we're talking, just right after World Cup in Qatar finished, yeah, and before the Saudi Arabian one.
I'm getting the vibe from these guys about that. I was because I still play football a little bit, very, very badly. And something that I mention every single day of my life, and I'll do it now, I once played with Diego Maradona. I mention that every day of my life. But I recently played in a game in Bosnia, and Alexander Seferin was there. And actually, I think he's quite an interesting guy and quite likable in lots of ways. And I was trying to get him going on Infantino. And how can I put this without divulging too? There was a lot of eye rolling going on. I mean, just answer, what the fuck was he doing in Egypt at the Gaza conference? What the effing hell was going on? And likewise, what was Trump doing on the podium with the Chelsea players at the Club World Cup? Where, by the way, he stole one of the medals. He took one of the Chelsea players' medals. Yeah, I know he's got the trophy, but that's fine. You can make another. The Chelsea squad are on the platform, and he saw them because he likes gold. I don't know if you've noticed that. And he saw a medal, and he put it in his pocket. So one of the Chelsea players doesn't have a medal from that day, right? I don't know. I think it's going to be that World Cup. I'm always wary about doing the kind of Hitler comparisons, but I think if you look at the Berlin Games in 1936, I think this World Cup is going to be about Trump and Trump and Trump, and it's going to be about money and money and money. And the trouble is that if Scotland qualify, I'm going to feel I've got to go. And it looks, given that everybody's going to qualify, because that's the other thing that they kind of, So yeah, it's not good. Thank you for the football questions.
Okay, I think this is going to be a non-football question. This is my guess.
I think that Tony Blair's government did rather well. I mean, it was in power for quite a long time, and there didn't seem to be many problems apart from losing in the end. And the follow-up was maybe Cameron and the coalition government. Is that a model for anyone? Was that a success, or was it just a blip?
Well, look, I'm glad you said. I think it was a success. It's the first time ever that a left-of-centre party has won more than 2 terms, let alone winning 3. And I think we did a lot of amazing things. Northern Ireland Peace Process, Sure Start, which was about helping the poorest kids in the country, minimum wage, Bank of England independence, ambassador from Kosovo here. I think the intervention in relation to Kosovo was actually in many ways Tony Blair's finest hour, because he was such a big part of that. So I think we did a lot of good things. I think that it's not so much that there are lessons, but I think that you can never underestimate in politics the ability of an individual political leader to connect with the moment and the mood of a country. Tony did that, no doubt about that. I thought Macron was doing it, and I think he did for a while until the French went through the usual habit of voting for change, and then as soon as the change came along, rebelling against it. But I think Tony did that. So never underestimate the significance and the power of the person who gets to the very top and how they then communicate and execute and narrate a strategy. And I think that is the big lesson that I think a lot of leaders today, particularly because of social media and the way the media's developed, they think the response is to be more tactical. The response should be to be even more strategic. And I think Tony's got that. But look, even now, it's a different age now. It's already a different age.
Just to finish on Blair, he managed the royal family quite well over Diana.
Well, managing a royal family is, as King Charles is finding right now with his younger brother, it's never easy. But yeah, I think, look, Tony had extraordinary personal and political skills. And, you know, a lot of people in Britain, they'll say, oh, Tony Blair, yeah, but all he'll ever been remembered for is Iraq. It's not true. He'll be remembered for an awful lot of things. And I think there are things that today's leaders can learn. But to me, that's the most important one, is actually be more strategic, not less strategic. And too many of them at the moment, they're tactical.
I know we have another question, but I just want to jump in and follow up on this, because this is something I've been wondering about for a long time. Because how did we get to this populist moment? I think one of the things that happened is politics stopped or started being about class in a different manner. And wouldn't you agree, class, yeah, and wouldn't you agree that this third way brand of politics that we saw in a number of European countries, but also with, you know, Bill Clinton, etc., was the beginning of the end of the way we did politics in the 20th century, and was the beginning of what we're seeing now. I don't know where this will take us, but where class, you know, this left-right divide stopped working and stopped making politics easier to navigate for people.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of what the third way was about was, in a sense, trying to declass government, to say that, you know, Labour shouldn't disrespect business, business shouldn't disrespect Labour. The Labour Party itself should strive to get the support of people who see themselves as entrepreneurial, aspirational. And in a way, though I despise the guy, what Boris Johnson did quite successfully for the Conservatives was to say to working class people, there's nothing wrong with you being Conservatives. So I think that was breaking down, that sort of stuff was breaking down. I don't think that and the other thing, I don't think this is driven by us kind of misunderstanding changes in class. What I do think, you mentioned Clinton, I think Clinton, Tony, Schroeder, all the kind of third way leaders, all did amazing stuff in their own different ways. But I think all of them were too slow, myself included, to realize that there was a downside to globalization that was going to come and hit us very, very hard. So I think a lot of this nationalism now is in a sense, you know, America first. The new lady in Japan has just been elected, Taikachi, you know, Japan first. It's all about saying globalization, even the concept of an international rules-based order. You know, these guys are saying, no, national, no rules, we do what we want. Now, for me, you end up with the law of the jungle, and you've got to be very, very careful about that because it's incredibly dangerous. But so I don't think it was about class. But it is interesting how, you know, you look at the polling in the UK right now, Reform, which is a very, very, very right-wing nationalist party, they are getting a lot of their supporters as former Conservatives who are broadly working class. Labour now gets a lot of its support from educated people living in fairly affluent city areas. So there's been a shift, and that shift, I don't know. It's never worth saying, how do we get it back to where it was? You've got to take it forward to something new.
But I'm wondering, was this the cause of the effect? I mean, the third way, was this happening and you bought into that, or did you cause it in a way?
Yeah, possibly. I honestly don't know the answer to that, because I think it's really complicated. I think we were trying to broaden our electoral appeal because we were trying to broaden our electoral base, and we were very successful in that. The people, what I worry about the Labour strategy at the moment, Labour government strategy, is I worry that they're trying to appeal too much to people on the right who are never going to vote Labour, and they're taking for granted people on the left who are now finding there are alternatives. They can vote Green. They can vote Liberal Democrat. They can vote for the SNP in Scotland. They can vote for the Welsh Nationalists in Wales, which they've just done in a by-election. A seat that Labour has held for 100 years, Labour has just come third to the Welsh Nationalists and Reform. So the old tribal loyalties have kind of gone. So what Trump is doing is building a new tribal loyalty built almost entirely around himself. Your question at the start, does the West survive? A lot will depend on what follows Trump. If the Democrats do get their act together and do find a good candidate and do manage to change the mood and change the politics, it could go back. I think if Vance is the next American president, it goes in pretty much the same journey, and possibly even worse, because he actually believes it.
I have a question. I'm 17 and I'm in my last year of high school, and I also played academy football for quite a long time. Oh. And something I've noticed is that when you talk about politics in these environments, populism, especially right-wing populism, really dominates in the talk. Mainly, I think, because of social media and all these loud headlines that are thrown at people without even having to do too much thinking about them. I was thinking if you have any ideas about tackling that.
Well, it's hard. I mean, you know, one of the reasons that I started the Rest is Politics podcast was a way of trying to sort of simplify really complicated debates that are going on. And I'm pleased to say a third of our listeners are under 30. So we've got a lot of young people listening, and I'm really pleased about that. But it's how populism operates. I'll tell you, and this is why I'm so worried about AI, because it's going to accelerate this stuff so much, is that Farage and Trump, they're both masters of this thing, of basically putting stuff out there to bait the liberals. I mean, you know, Steve Bannon once said that, you know, that he said to me that you've got to understand, people like us, we exist to rile up people like you. Right, and they love to do that, and how they often do it is by being quite funny at the start. And so one of the things I always say to people when I go into schools is, don't find it funny, don't laugh at it. Try to work out why it's being done in the way that it's done. And I don't think you can counter this stuff unless you have, unless you have a sense of kind of educating yourself about how things work. I'm actually, one of the things I'm worried about in Britain, I've campaigned for years to lower the voting age so that people like you can get the vote at 16 and 17. Now that it's happened, I'm actually quite worried about it. Nigel Farage has got more followers on TikTok than every other MP combined. Why? Because he's worked at it over years. That's what he does. He does work out the future trends, particularly he's obsessed with media. It's all he thinks about. He doesn't care about policy. He's not really interested in, you know, the ins and outs of immigration policy. He cares about how he can exploit that in this ever-changing media landscape. So what the left, the progressive side of politics have to do, we've got to get better at navigating that new landscape. Back to Mamdani, you know, that's what he's done. He's worked out the old ways of doing politics aren't working anymore. Find the new ways that do work, and sometimes steal the ideas from the other guys. But hopefully don't reduce yourself to lying, bullying, intimidating. I'll give you another example, which, you know, there's a big debate going on in the Democrats at the moment whether this is effective or not. I think at least it's worth trying. I don't know if you follow Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. He is basically trolling Trump 24/7 by doing stuff. He's using fake videos. He's taking stuff that Trump does and he's twisting it and turning it in a way to draw attention to what he believes as opposed to what Trump believes. I think we've got to get into that space and be less squeamish about fighting like that.
Okay, last question.
Thank you. Back to this original kind of question that was about how the liberals can compete with the illiberal populists, because I feel like you've spoken a lot about the ways, the methods, the measures, the strategies of communicating, but I'm kind of wondering, like, getting into that, like into the content of the actual narrative, like what are the what do you feel would be the topics, the motives, the emotions to tap into for that to work?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the big one is inequality. I think inequality is driving a lot of this stuff. And I think it's inequality that is going to be worsened by artificial intelligence. And I don't think there's even a debate beginning about that yet. I find it terrifying the extent to which the left is losing, a lot of it because of Trump, but not just Trump, losing the arguments on climate change. And I think the other thing that's happened is that the progressives have become very, very, very defensive about their own values. And they've got to fight for them harder. I'll give you a classic example. And I know there's a risk in this, right? But I think any democratic leader who believes in the rule of law has to be calling out things that have been going on. For example, the Americans destroying these boats off Venezuela, right? How do we all just stand by and say literally nothing? So I'd say, I think it's about, bringing forward ideas that address inequality. And if that takes you into really difficult political areas, like the taxation system, like AI regulation, then don't pussyfoot into them. Don't carry the Ming vase into them, but say, okay, go away, do the intellectual thinking, really drill through, and then come out and shout your head off about it. There was a thing I saw last week. I mean, it was just this graph of things that have happened since Labour came into power. They come and go literally in 24 hours. This is the new kind of media landscape. You've got to be engineering things that stay in the debate day after day after day after day. And they would be the three areas for me: inequality, climate, and our values. That's what I would put right at the heart of it.
Alistair Campbell, thank you very much.
Enjoyed it.
This is really fun.
Posłuchajcie również naszych innych audycji, które znajdziecie na najważniejszych platformach podcastowych i w aplikacji radia TOK FM. Do usłyszenia.